The man who just sold out 3 straight nights at Yankee Stadium and turned the Bronx into his personal victory lap is now walking into SoFi Stadium on October 23rd. And if you think for 1 second that what happened in New York is going to stay in New York, you have not been paying attention to what this man has been building for the last 12 months. Because the story you are being told is that Jay-Z is doing a 30th anniversary run. That is the surface. That is the wrapping paper. That is what the tickets say. But the story underneath the story, the one that is actually about to detonate on October 23rd at SoFi, is a completely different situation, and I need you to hear me right now. Every single move on this tour, every guest, every call-out, every Pharrell speech about bears cutting their hair and putting on helmets, every single one of these decisions has been leading to one specific moment on one specific stage in Inglewood, California. And the person at the center of that moment is not Jay-Z, it is Kendrick Lamar. Everybody on the OVO side of the internet knows it, everybody at Rock Nation knows it, and the reason nobody is saying it out loud yet is because the second it becomes real, the entire narrative that has been propped up about who won, who lost, who was picked, and who was passed over collapses in real time. What I am about to walk you through is not a rumor. This is a pattern. And when we get to the part about the SoFi guest list, the Pharrell warning shot, and the reason Drake's Iceman disses were the exact thing that guaranteed this moment would happen, I promise you we are getting there. You are going to understand that this show was never just a concert. It was a coronation being planned in plain sight. And every person on the other side of this Cold War has been walking directly into it for months without realizing the trap was already set. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. All right, so let me give you the full landscape before we get into the evidence, because a lot of people are showing up to this conversation halfway through the movie, and if you do not understand the pieces on the board, none of what is about to happen on October 23rd is going to make sense. Jay-Z, real name Sean Carter, is currently in the middle of what he is calling Jay-Z 30, a 30th anniversary run of Reasonable Doubt and the full body of work that came after it. He already ran 3 sold-out nights at Yankee Stadium in New York. He brought out Beyoncé, he brought out Blue Ivy, he brought out Nas, he brought out Memphis Bleak, he brought out Alicia Keys, he brought out Eminem for the Renegade moment, he brought out Pharrell Williams, Slick Rick, Rihanna, Usher, Jeezy, Fat Joe, Jadakiss, Swizz Beatz, The Dream, Jermaine Dupri, The Clips, and a room full of legends across 3 separate nights. That is not a concert. That is a museum of hip-hop being reopened one guest at a time. Now he has confirmed dates at Stade de France in Paris on September 10th and SoFi Stadium in Inglewood on Friday, October 23rd, 2026, kicking off at 8 p.m. That is the frame, that is the schedule, and on paper it looks like a legacy artist doing what legacy artists do. Victory lap, big guests, big crowds, big money. But here is what nobody wants to say out loud. On the other side of this story, you have Drake and the entire OVO ecosystem sitting on the receiving end of a 2024 beef with Kendrick Lamar that has aged worse every single week since the last shot was fired. Kendrick won Song of the Year, Record of the Year, 5 Grammys in one night off a diss record. Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl. Kendrick sold out SoFi Stadium 3 nights in a row on the Grand National Tour in May of 2025, moving roughly 147,000 tickets and pulling in over $40 million in that building alone. Reportedly, the highest grossing box score by a rapper in history at that venue. That is the person Jay-Z is walking back into on October 23rd. And in the middle of all this, Drake decides to drop an album called Iceman with multiple shots at Jay-Z directly. The Jig Is Up line on Janice STFU, the 500K dinner line on Whisper My Name, the OG posturing that everybody heard clear as day. And Jay-Z, who does not usually respond to anything, actually responded. The "a rapper can't be my op" line, the "I'm up 10, wrong chart champ, never looked up to you" line, the whole freestyle that had the internet turned upside down for 72 hours. That is what has been building. That is the pressure cooker. And now, the man everybody wants to see step on that SoFi stage with Jay-Z is the exact man Drake spent the last 2 years trying to erase from the top of the sport. The question is not whether the tension is real. The tension is documented. The question is what happens the second those two men are standing on the same stage in Kendrick's home city, and whether the culture is emotionally prepared for what that image is going to do to the last remaining piece of the OVO narrative. Let's start with what we can see with our own eyes, because before we get into the deeper layers, I want everybody clear that this is not me pulling things out of the sky. This is a pattern that has been on public display for months. And the first piece of that pattern is the guest list from Yankee Stadium itself. 3 nights, not 1, 3. And on those 3 nights, Jay-Z brought out a roster of guests that essentially said, out loud, I can call anybody in this genre and they will show up for me. Beyoncé is a given. Blue Ivy performing next to her mother in front of 60,000 people is a moment. Nas walking out on that stage with the man he was once at war with, that is a full-circle callback that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. Eminem doing Renegade in New York, Rihanna showing up, the Clips doing Chains and Whips, which, and I need everybody to remember this because it comes back later, is a record that features Kendrick Lamar on the original studio version. That is not a coincidence. That is the setup. The Clips are on this tour. They perform Chains and Whips. The song has a Kendrick verse. Kendrick was not in New York because Kendrick was on his own tour schedule, but the placeholder for him was already sitting in the set list the whole time. Piece of evidence number 1. Now, piece of evidence number 2, Pharrell's speech at Yankee Stadium. If you have not seen this clip, pause the video, go find it, come back. Pharrell walks out on that stage in front of everybody and delivers what can only be described as a public declaration of war on behalf of Jay-Z. They poked the bear, he yells to the crowd, and then the bear cut his hair, and now he got on his helmet. That is not a coincidence line. That is not a freestyle. That is a targeted, deliberate, on-the-record statement telling everybody watching that Jay-Z is not in his diplomatic phase anymore. The bear cut his hair. The bear is going to war. And Pharrell is publicly telling the crowd that the retaliation is coming. Piece of evidence number 3, Jay-Z's own freestyle response to Iceman, the "a rapper can't be my op" line, the "I'm up 10, wrong chart champ, never looked up to you" line. Jay-Z, a man who has spent the last decade barely acknowledging any of this stuff publicly, decided to actually pick up the microphone and answer. That does not happen unless something has fundamentally shifted. That does not happen unless he has already decided that the era of ignoring the shots is over. Piece of evidence number 4, and this is the one nobody is talking about the right way, the SoFi Stadium choice itself. Jay-Z did not pick SoFi randomly. Jay-Z picked SoFi because SoFi is the exact building where Kendrick Lamar just made history 5 months earlier. 3 sold-out nights, highest-grossing rap box score in the venue's history. That building is currently, culturally, Kendrick's building, and Jay-Z walking into that building on October 23, 2026, without acknowledging the man who just baptized the room, that would not just be strange, that would be borderline disrespectful in a way Jay-Z, of all people, does not do. Piece of evidence number 5, the Iceman fallout timeline. Drake's shots at Jay-Z hit, Jay-Z responded, and the very next moves that Roc Nation made in public, new tour dates, new guest reveals, new speeches from Pharrell, all of it started tightening after that album dropped. That is not reactive, that is retaliatory. The board was already set. Iceman was the excuse to move the pieces.
And oh, do I have more for you. Because if you thought the surface stuff was interesting, wait until we get into what the people around this thing have actually been saying, because the OVO side is not gonna like this next part at all. The stands that have been running around all year telling everybody that Kendrick is a Roc Nation puppet, those are the same people who are about to have to explain on camera, in real time, why the man they said was a pawn is standing next to Jay-Z at SoFi, getting flowers passed to him in front of Kendrick's own city. I have receipts, I have sources, I have public statements, and the picture that comes together when you line all of it up is not the picture the other side has been trying to sell. Let's talk about the cultural layer now, because this is where the story stops being about a concert lineup and starts being about the entire ecosystem around these two men. First, Pharrell Williams. Pharrell is not just a guest on this tour. Pharrell is the ideological voice of this era of Jay-Z. The Bear speech at Yankee Stadium was one thing, but if you go back through the last 6 months of Pharrell's public appearances, interviews, and studio moments, there has been a very deliberate positioning happening. Pharrell has been quietly aligned with the anti-OVO faction for a full year, down to the reported situation with certain chains and jewelry pieces that have shown up on the wrong bodies in the wrong photos. Pharrell has been on the record more than once, essentially saying that Jay-Z has been holding his fire and that the fire is coming. That is your first piece of cultural evidence. Piece number 2, the clips, Pusha T and Malice. This is where it gets very specific. The Clips have a song with Kendrick Lamar called Chains and Whips. That song is on Let God Sort 'Em Out, their album from last year. The Clips are on the Jay-Z 30 tour. They performed the record in New York without Kendrick. But when you go to SoFi Stadium, the building Kendrick just conquered, and you have Pusha T on stage, and you have a Kendrick record already loaded into the set list, and you have a Kendrick who has publicly had complicated air with Drake for years going back to Control, the math does itself. There has been ongoing speculation, and I want to be careful here and label this as speculation, that there was a whole Chains and Whips remix situation with Jay-Z, Pusha, and Kendrick that was floated at some point. Whether that record exists as a completed piece of music or not, the fact that the conversation was ever in the air tells you exactly where the alliances are. Piece number 3, Kendrick's own recent movement. Kendrick has been spotted in New York during the exact window of the Yankee Stadium run, reportedly recording, reportedly in and out of studios that people close to Jay-Z operate out of. Now, that could be nothing. Kendrick records everywhere, but context matters, and the context is that a man who almost never leaves his creative bubble was suddenly, coincidentally, in the exact city at the exact time that the biggest guest-heavy tour of the year was rolling through. Piece number 4, the Super Bowl callback. Everybody remembers Jay-Z chose Kendrick for the halftime show. Everybody remembers Kendrick delivered one of the most watched, most discussed halftime performances in the history of the event. Everybody remembers Drake liking a post that called Kendrick a Roc Nation pawn after the fact. And now, here is the part that is going to bother the other side. Jay-Z has publicly denied that the Super Bowl pick was ever an anti-Drake move. That is on record, that is on video. So all the OVO narrative that this was some grand chess move against their guy, Jay-Z himself has already dismissed it. So when Kendrick walks out at SoFi on October 23rd, the "he only did it to spite Drake" argument is already been preempted by the man doing the picking. Now, I want to acknowledge the counter-argument here, because I want to be fair. Some people are going to say, you are reading too much into this. Jay-Z has 100 guests. Kendrick is on a break. He is not going to show up. This is fan fiction. And I hear you, I do. But here is why that argument does not survive contact with the actual facts. Jay-Z, historically, when he does anniversary shows and legacy runs, tailors the guest list to the city. New York got the New York legends. Paris is going to get the international and fashion world moments. LA, and this is what makes this so obvious, LA is going to get the West Coast legends. That means Snoop Dogg is in play, Dr. Dre is in play, Too Short is in play, Ice Cube is in play. And if you are already building the LA Legend Room, the current biggest artist to ever come out of Compton, the man who just sold that exact building out 3 nights in a row, is not going to be missing from that room. It would be the biggest miss in tour curation history, and Jay-Z does not miss on curation. That is not what he does. So when I tell you Kendrick Lamar is walking out at SoFi on October 23rd, I am not guessing. I am reading the pattern, and every single piece of the pattern points in the same direction. Now here is where I need everybody to lock in, because we are about to shift gears, and this is the section where I lose the casual viewers and keep the people who actually want to understand what is really happening. Because everything we have talked about so far, the guest list, the Pharrell speech, the clip set list, the SoFi choice, all of that is real and all of it matters, but none of it is the actual story. The actual story is a business story. The actual story is about the machine underneath the machine, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Layer 1 of the business story is Roc Nation itself.
Roc Nation is not just Jay-Z's management company. Roc Nation is a full-service label, publishing, sports, and philanthropy operation that has been quietly acquiring cultural influence for 2 decades. When Jay-Z curates a stage, he is not just curating a concert, he is curating a public statement about who Roc Nation stands next to and who Roc Nation does not. That's why the Super Bowl pick was so devastating to the other side, not because it was a musical decision, but because it was a corporate one. Roc Nation, through the NFL partnership, chose the story it wanted the biggest stage in American sports to tell. And now, at SoFi, Roc Nation is going to choose the story it wants the biggest cultural night of the year to tell. The choice of Kendrick is not a favor, it is a positioning statement. It says, in plain business language, that the future of the top of the genre is being routed through the artists Roc Nation aligns with. That's layer 1. Layer 2 is the streaming and touring economy. Here is a number nobody on the OVO side wants to talk about. Kendrick's grand national tour with SZA reportedly grossed over $400 million globally. Jay-Z's 30th anniversary run is on pace, based on the New York numbers alone, to be one of the
highest-grossing single-artist stadium runs in the history of hip-hop touring. Meanwhile, Drake's own tour numbers, while still large, have been trending in a very specific direction, and the narrative around his touring power has shifted from unstoppable global force to protected asset that has to be handled carefully by his team. When Kendrick walks out at SoFi, the number that is generated by that moment, the streaming spike, the social media impressions, the merch numbers, the secondary market ticket surge, flows into 2 ecosystems that are functionally aligned. It does not flow into the ecosystem that has been trying to reclaim the top of the game since May of 2024. That is a business event as much as it is a cultural one. Layer 3, and this is the deepest one, the ownership question. Jay-Z is a masters-owning artist. Kendrick, after leaving TDE for PG Lang and negotiating his current situation, has more control over his own catalog and his own output than he has ever had in his career. Both of these men, in different ways, represent a model of artist ownership that the traditional label system does not love. Drake, by contrast, has been operating under label structures for the entirety of his career, and the recent reporting about the internal state of his label relationships, the lawsuits, the UMG situation, the tension around the Kendrick beef and how it was handled internally, paints a picture of an artist who is inside a system, while the men on the other side of this equation are increasingly outside of it, or building their own. When Jay-Z and Kendrick stand next to each other at SoFi, that image is not just symbolic, it is structural. It is the ownership generation standing next to the ownership generation. And every artist under 30 who is watching that image is going to internalize correctly that the next 20 years of this genre belongs to the artists who own themselves, not the ones who are still trying to renegotiate out of deals they signed when they were 22. That is what October 23rd is really about. It is not a guest spot. It is a business summit dressed up as a concert. And now we get to the part I have been building to since the first sentence of this video. Because once you understand the business, once you understand the guest list, once you understand the Pharrell speech and the Iceman timeline and the SoFi choice, the truth bomb becomes unavoidable. And I'm going to say it as clearly as I can. The moment Kendrick Lamar walks out on that SoFi stage on October 23, 2026, and Jay-Z steps back and lets him have the room, that moment is the official, undeniable, on-the-record end of the argument about who won. Not just the beef, not just the Grammy season, the entire argument about who the culture chose, about who the elders chose, about who the machine, the real machine, the ownership machine, the legacy machine, chose to pass the torch to. That is what this is. This is a torch pass, and it is being done in the most public, most deliberate, most impossible to spin way that Jay-Z has ever done anything in his career. Think about it like this. When Snoop Dogg passed the torch to Kendrick years ago on that famous night, that was a West Coast moment. That was regional. That was one legend acknowledging the next one from his home. What is about to happen at SoFi is bigger than that. This is not a West Coast handoff. This is the East Coast in the person of the man who has been the most powerful East Coast rapper alive for 30 years, walking into the West Coast, into Kendrick's building, and publicly in front of the entire genre saying, "This is who it is now." And I want to be very careful here, because I keep it alleged when I need to keep it alleged. Nobody has officially confirmed Kendrick's appearance. Nobody has posted the set list. Nobody has leaked the guest list. So technically, all of this is speculation until we see it. But the pattern, the setup, the business logic, the cultural math, every single input points to the same output. And when it happens, the people who spent the last 2 years telling anybody who would listen that Kendrick was a puppet, that the beef was manufactured, that Jay-Z was picking sides for petty reasons, those people are going to have to sit inside a moment they cannot explain away. Because you cannot explain away a torch pass. You cannot explain away one legend standing next to another legend in the biggest building in the biggest music market in the country and giving him the floor. That is not narrative. That is documented reality. And the second that image goes online, and it will, within minutes, in 4K from 1,000 different phones, the last remaining piece of the OVO counter-narrative dies in public. There is no post you can make, there is no lyric you can drop, there is no interview clip you can share that survives the image of Jay-Z passing Kendrick the torch at SoFi. It is over. And the most brutal part of it is that the person on the other side of this handed the ammunition to the people doing the handoff. Every diss on Iceman, every Jay-Z shot, every the jig is up line, every 500K down to dinner line, all of it added another reason for Jay-Z to walk into that building and make this exact statement. The other side built the stage they are about to be embarrassed on.
And here is the thing that ties it all together. The hero of this entire story has been unfazed the entire time. Kendrick Lamar has not made a single reactive move in 12 months. He did the Super Bowl, he ran the tour, he sold the buildings, he won the awards, and he went back to work. That is the whole model. That is the whole identity. While the other side has been posting, deleting, liking screenshots, dropping albums stuffed with subliminals, and treating every news cycle like an emergency, the man at the center of this story has been operating on a completely different frequency. He does not chase. He does not respond unless a response is a piece of art. He does not campaign. He works, he wins, and he lets the results carry the argument. That is why this SoFi moment is going to land the way it is going to land. Because it is not going to feel like a gift being handed to Kendrick. It is going to feel like a recognition of something that was already true. The culture already picked him. The Grammys already picked him. The Super Bowl already picked him. The touring numbers already picked him. All Jay-Z is doing on October 23rd is standing on that stage and saying out loud what the numbers and the awards and the streams have been saying for 2 years. One person makes music that has to be defended by lawyers and lawsuits and label statements. The other person makes music that is defended by the fact that it exists. One person is trying to relitigate a beef that ended in the summer of 2024. The other person has moved so far past it that the beef is now just a footnote in a much bigger story about a generational artist becoming a generational institution. And the people who told you Kendrick would fade after the beef, that he was a moment, that he was a lucky victor, that he could not survive without the drama, those people are watching him sell out stadiums, headline the Super Bowl, and get a torch pass from Jay-Z in the same 24-month window. It is not luck. It is not a moment. It is a permanent shift in the top of the genre. And the evidence is loud enough now that even the people who did not want to hear it are hearing it. Discipline wins, craft wins, ownership wins, silence at the right moments wins. That is the entire lesson of the last 2 years of hip-hop, and October 23rd is where that lesson gets carved into the wall. But listen, this is only the start. I need everybody to understand that, because October 23rd is not the end of this arc. October 23rd is the ignition. There are 2 specific things I am watching for immediately after that show, and I want you locked in for both of them. Number 1, the album. Kendrick has been moving in ways that only make sense if there is another project loading. The Fanatics appearances, the studio sightings, the tour extensions, the fact that he keeps showing up in the biggest possible rooms at the biggest possible moments. When this tour cycle wraps, I fully expect an album announcement, and I fully expect it to be the biggest rollout in the genre next year. Number 2, the Jay-Z next move. If Jay-Z is willing to publicly respond to Iceman with a freestyle, willing to bring the biggest guest list in touring history to Yankee Stadium, willing to walk into SoFi with Kendrick on deck, the next step in that sequence is going to be something even the industry insiders are not ready for. There is more coming. There is always more coming with him. And when it lands, I'm going to be right here breaking it down piece by piece, exactly like I have been for the last 2 years, exactly like I did when I told y'all this beef was not going to end where the OVO side kept telling you it was going to end. Stand with me. Comment down below with what you want me to cover next, whether it is the full SoFi guest list prediction, the Iceman breakdown line by line, or the Rock Nation business situation heading into 2027. Hit that like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach the people who are still stuck watching the surface level content that misses everything we just walked through. And subscribe because the next video I am dropping is the one nobody else on YouTube is going to have the receipts to make. The full breakdown of what happens the morning after October 23rd. The OVO response cycle, the media pivot, and the specific artist Drake is reportedly reaching out to in an attempt to control the narrative before the SoFi footage even finishes uploading. You do not want to miss that one. Trust me. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.